Hey everybody, it's Becca. I am in Lexington, Kentucky here with legendary SOV director, writer, Tim Ritter. Yay!
Should I clap for myself?
Yes, I think you should, yes.
Golf clap.
Yes, there's a small peanut gallery here. So,
yes, there is an audience out there.
So he is generous enough to allow me to come to his house and see some of the things that he's doing on the set. So with Shannon Stockin, who now she's just emerged. She was covered in poisonous snake bites a minute ago. That's Kathy Ritter, the snake placement person. Snake wrangler. Hey. No laughing.
I just had a dirty thought.
I see where you're going.
It looks like you have one coming out of your butt from this angle.
Yes. Yum.
Oh, does that look yummy?
Hasn't tasted that good since it was at the dollar store. But we talked a few weeks ago about Zombarella's House of Horrors, which you were involved in, Shannon was involved in.
Yes.
But we didn't really get to talk about your career. So Slade Shepherd and I, we bonded over being kind of misfit kids in the 80s and early 90s who just rented everything we could find in our small, crappy, dead-end towns when we were kids. And I say kids, but here's the thing, guys. If you don't know much about Tim Ritter, you probably know at least a couple things. It got really sunny all of a sudden. Okay, so the first thing is he's been in film since the early 80s, or at least in distributed film since the early 80s. It sounds like since way earlier than that. But he made this little movie, okay? But you've seen this cover. So, and I will be asking you about that. So he made this movie in, what, 86?
Yeah, 86.
And you were, how old?
17, 18 years old.
Yeah, so when I say this is like the stuff of my childhood, I mean, you weren't that much older than I am. You're
wow.
Yeah, you're 9 years older than I am. I say it's the thing of my youth. It's not like I'm sitting here with somebody who is, you know, like 70 years old or something.
Right.
You know, I'm sitting here with like my contemporary, and that kind of fascinates me. So how did you get started in film altogether before you ever thought about trying to put something out in a video store?
I don't know, when I was little, I always just wrote stuff, you know, when I was 4 or 5 years old. And then when I saw the family Super 8 movie camera, I just connected with it and knew that, you know, and my dad always made family movies, and I was always thinking after I saw Jaws and the Incredible Melting Man trailer and stuff like that, that wow, I can make my own movies. And then when I saw Halloween on television, then I realized that with point of view shot, pretty girl and a rubber knife, I could kind of emulate
Right,
that.
and I think that probably, do you think that was a turning point for a lot of your contemporaries?
I would say definitely.
Yeah.
The 80s slasher that Halloween kind of ushered in.
Right.
Definitely.
If you had like a friend who was a pretty girl and a guy who was somewhat daunting looking, and you had a Halloween mask and some
That
kind of
was it.
weapon, there
Yep,
you
in
go,
high
some
school,
fake blood.
I was always trying to get the jocks and the cheerleaders to, you know, my thing was be in my movie, please be in my movie. And that's the only time I ever really, you know, kind of socialized with, you know, a lot of the core group of people.
Yeah. So you pretty much started in horror. So I've listened to some of your interviews about, so I already know some of the stuff, but I'm feeding you questions,
right.
of course. But it seems like you were instantly drawn to horror. What was the reason behind that, as opposed to any other genre?
It was something that, again, as a kid growing up, my mom watched Dark Shadows. I would watch that with her. Star Trek, the old TV show, and reruns, which kind of had monsters and that kind of thing. And Jaws and Halloween. It was just dinosaurs. It was just something that, and even Star Wars with the aliens and the creatures. And,
Yeah,
you know,
just
that's
effect, like the effects stuff.
Yeah,
kind
it
of
was always something I was
sounds
fascinated
like you were
with.
very effects
And
heavy
I
then.
just never deviated from, you know, liking that.
Okay, so now, so you are often linked with Joel Weinkoop,
Right.
who's kind of your partner in crime.
Right, he was my babysitter across the street.
Right.
When I was growing up.
Right. So yeah, so he was already doing films.
He was doing little Super 8 movies. He was doing like a spoof on the $6 Million Man, and I got to be in it. My dad drove the van, and I think I was a villain that helped kidnap somebody. So I remember that, and that's when I was kind of picking up on the Super 8, you know, camera, going, I can do this too.
So it was something where, from a very young age, it was something that was feasible in your mind that you
Yes.
could do. And you grew up in Florida?
Yes.
Right. Okay. 'Cause I always like to say that I think my life would have been a little different if I'd grown up somewhere else.
Could be, you never know.
Right, because even, I mean, I was a video store girl in the early 90s, whatever, and, you know, and I always liked the, like, low-budget B movies, and I was just like, even the shittiest of the shittiest of the shitty, all were, like, from New York or LA still.
Right.
I mean,
For me, the regional movie making, kind of with George Romero, he did his thing in Pittsburgh, and that's
Right.
what I kind of studied. And H.G. Lewis, who I connected with even in the 80s, he was down in Fort Lauderdale, and you know, I was always trying to get him to do cameos, and it wasn't till later. And then later, Joel D. Wynkoop starred in his Uh-Oh show movie, I believe. So yeah, regional movie making was always my thing. I'm going to bring it to me, or I'm going to have it done. I'm going to do it myself where I am, as opposed to like
Right.
you're talking about going to Hollywood.
Day of the Reaper was the
Yes.
first one that you, and it was just Silent 8 dubbed over,
Yeah,
pretty
dubbed.
rough. I've only seen clips of it. I've never seen. I'm
Right.
sure Slade is probably going, "Oh, Becca, I have it on VHS and I have the special edition." You know, but
It has
not
been
me.
released on
Yes,
Blu-ray now,
and I've seen
everything,
Mr. Parka. He has the one that's, I think it's a VHS and a DVD on the
Yeah,
inside.
they had special editions
Yeah,
with that too.
yeah,
so.
jealous. But I've only seen, you know, some parts of it. But obviously, you can tell there was some creativity in there. And you did use a lot of kind of Halloween type things. Like you had the killers, like the white and black mask killer, very simple
Right.
masks and that kind of thing. So what was different about that than anything else that you had done that you said, I'm going to try to get somebody to buy this movie?
I think it was seeing the video stores popping up, you know, in that era, 1984, 1985, and I was like, instead of just showing these movies to neighbors and friends and school, you know, school classes, you know, we'd show them, and the teachers would usually get in trouble if they were
Right.
gory. So at that point, then I said, you know, I can probably get these out on the shelves with these other movies, and I was like, at that point, I said, let's just do something right for the direct-to-video market, which there was none at that point.
Right.
You know. There were other people starting to do it, but I had no clue. I was just in my mind as like a 10th, 11th grader in high school, and I couldn't graduate fast enough because, you know, I wanted to get started
Right.
on that. So I was working on it for like my junior and senior year. I was like, we're going to do this movie, we're going to sell it to the video stores and go to the next level and get something else out, and that's kind of how I saw it.
Now, in this day and age where I'm recording you on a high def camera on a phone.
And the size of this.
Yes, this tiny little thing. I've got this tiny little mic that's, you know, great or whatever. I'm going to pop this in my computer, use Premiere, whatever, and I'm just some Joe Schmo. I make no money off of this. I just know what I know. It seems easy. You know, I could print my own
Covers,
covers,
yeah.
blah, blah, blah. Seems like an impossible, insurmountable task in '84. Did you already have like a template for that? Like you said, I mean, at that point in time, the straight to video market was not really even there.
Right. No, we just kind of, you know, there were big boxes, and there were boxes kind of like DVDs with sleeves, so we
Right.
made our own.
Right, the clamshells.
Yeah, with clamshells. At first I used mailing tape to hold them in there. We didn't even know to buy the stuff to, you know, the part where you could open the sleeve up and put it in there. It was just wrapped up
Yeah.
in mailing tape, and we started to sell them like that. And as we went along, we said, oh, if we get these cases, we can put them in here, and let's do a better cover, and you know, all that sort
So
of
who
thing.
did the artwork initially?
For Day of the Reaper, it was a classmate of mine named Pat Foster, and he was a good artist, and he did the school newspaper thing. And then for Twisted Illusions, him and also Joel Wynkoop is an artist, and he did some artwork for one of them. And then we had a real weird photocopied cover, kind of like an old, you know, punk rock metal band where you just do your
Yeah, like
flyers, plaster
right.
it up. It was the same concept
Same
out of the
concept.
trunk of our cars, and it was like, and then we go into the stores and say, hey, I'm Tim Ritter, here's Joel Wynkoop, we made this, and do you want to buy a copy? And you get all kinds of weird responses, or people would be like, no, you didn't make that, you're lying, or I'll trade you for a poster. I got a lot of posters like that.
yeah.
I would be like going, well, yeah, I like that Scarface
bar-
poster.
the barter
yeah,
system.
let's
It would
do
always-
that. So you could, you know, it was a learning experience. And of course, over the years, you couldn't do that then later because it was
Right.
a corporate monopoly. They'd have to go through buyers. But this was when mom and pops owned it. And he was like, local people, yeah, we'll do this. I was like, look, it's shot locally. You can put, you know, shot in your backyard.
So how many copies of Day of the Reaper did you sell out of your trunk like that?
Initially, probably a few hundred, and then as it went on, we connected with van guys, and van guys were guys who went all over like the East Coast and kind of traded tapes and stocked the mom and pop stores and that evolved into probably about 500 over a few years, and then it just continued to sell, slowly over the years. And then when there became the retro interest in like 2000,
Right.
and there was like a VHS release, another VHS release,
Right.
a double VHS, and then it just kind of took off from there as kind of a novelty where people were like going, wow, this guy kind of started out with nothing, and look at this weird movie, and it kind of inspires other movie makers. It's a terrible
Well, yeah.
movie, but it was the ambition.
Yeah, but like I said, there,
think.
ambition, there's passion, there was,
And no connections with Hollywood or
most,
anything like that.
most
so.
of that stuff, if you watch the first movies of anybody to start out with, they're
Right.
not the greatest thing, but you can see the
Right.
potential
And it has
there.
some good scenes in it. I still
Yeah.
think I can look at it and be like, oh yeah, because I had the whole Jason versus Freddy
Yeah,
idea.
yes, yes,
And H.G. Lewis,
Yeah.
inspired. So
which is awesome. So then you came out with Truth or Dare, which this is kind of landmark in, to me at least, in the shot on video revolution, home video revolution. This was a movie that was just made by so at this point in time you would have been, 19?
Right.
19-year-old kid, and ends up being a recognizable video store, just as recognizable as anything else that came out in 1986, I would say. And in fact, I was even talking to my podcast co-host, Jason Smith, who this is not his thing at all. And I mentioned this movie. He's like, oh, yeah, that one where it just looks like it's just like blood dripping from the letters. And I'm like, yeah, because he grew up renting this kind of
Right.
stuff. And, and I'm like, I don't know if you've seen it or not, but yes, you've seen that in the video store. And that really seems to have been, I guess, your taking off point, definitely.
Right,
But
yeah, definitely.
how did you do that? Was that using the leverage of all of the video stores you'd already made the connections with, or did you have new connections for that?
Probably the process was we sold Day of the Reaper and Twisted Illusions, ran into the Van guys, and the Van guys ended up selling to this company called Video Swap International in Chicago.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah, and they were like distributing movies, and long story short, they were like, oh, we would like to do a direct-to-video horror movie ourselves. And they were a distributor. They'd done a comedy called Vegetable House, and I was
That
like,
couldn't have been
well,
like a takeoff on Animal House or anything.
well, it was kind of a Saturday Night Live, Second City TV type
Yeah.
of spoof thing. But they were trying to get into the direct-to-video market as well. And I think they were in the process of distributing 555, which is another
Yes,
shot
which
on video.
which we did on the SOBs Who Love SOV.
So,
That was the only one, actually, that we have been talking about that I did not see when I was a kid.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yes, and I watched that a couple weeks ago. It was fabulous. I loved
Exactly,
it.
yeah.
Yes, I'm like, why did I
Classic.
never pick this one up?
So that was how it kind of started. And when I was a senior in high school, I wrote the expanded script based on the short, because we did an anthology movie called Twisted Illusions. There was a short called Truth or Dare. I expanded it. We sent it to this company who showed interest. And long story short, it took about a year of negotiating with them as I graduated high school. And I said, this is what I'm going to do. This movie, in my mind, it was going to be made no matter what. And I connected with another friend of mine, Al Nicolosi, who was kind of like my mentor. He worked for ABC television station. And he showed me the ropes of editing at the time. Of course, all that.
Which I'm sure is.
Yeah, it was like 1-inch video and not non-linear, but tape and
Yeah.
analog and all that stuff. So we were going to do it even for $60,000 if we had to, even raise the money ourselves. And we had groups of people who were ready. Miami Vice was shooting. We had the casting director for that. We were already casting. It was kind of like, later I saw a documentary called Hearts of Darkness about the making of Apocalypse
Right.
Now. And Francis Ford Coppola. A lot of this you learn by doing it, but you can look at other really big filmmakers and go, wow, I knew that when I was doing it.
Right, just
You
a different scale.
Yeah,
or a
you
different,
just start,
different location.
and if anybody who wants to make their own movie, my biggest piece of advice is just do it. You've got to give yourself into the mindset where you're going to be doing it, and you start casting it. You do the budget, and you're either going to do it big or small. You're going to downsize it if you can't get the amount of money. You're going to upsize it if you get more than you expect, and that's kind of what happened in this case. This distributor said, we're going to do this, and it started out at $100,000 and went up to $250,000, and they got a lot of people from Chicago and other big movies involved, doing stunts. And so as it expanded, I was able to rewrite scenes and do explosives and
Right.
pyrotechnics and special effects and, you know, other things that weren't originally planned as, you know, when we were going to do it ourselves small. So,
Now, the one thing you mentioned is you throw out the $60,000 number. That's actually any of us. You throw any of us 60 grand, we could make a movie, right?
Exactly.
Today,
yeah,
60
yeah.
grand is like, oh yeah,
It seemed like
we
a
are
lot
in.
then. Yeah,
Yes.
it seemed like a lot then.
But a
it's,
lot of it was because it was being shot on video, and you were having to
Right.
you were having to make copies yourself, or was the
Right. Well,
distributor
and
doing that at that
editing,
point?
you didn't. Nobody realizes now, looking back, that editing was $250 an hour on
Well,
Beta SP.
right, because nobody owned the equipment. You
You
probably had to go to
couldn't-
what, a TV
You had to go to
station
a
or
different
something?
place or a different town and book the time and, you know,
Mm-hmm.
do all this crazy stuff, and it would be thousands of dollars
Right.
to edit a feature movie.
But it was still, I guess, for the time, that was still a step up in the affordability category, just to go to shot on video, correct?
Right, right.
Now, let's talk a little bit about Truth or Dare, because it is kind of, you know, it is one of the main movies we'll also talk about. So I brought these. I'm showing them only because I'm having Slade having these
Buy
signed for
these.
Slade. Buy these. In fact, we'll talk about this in a minute. This is an awesome set. So Truth or Dare is about a man who is distraught, let's say.
Right.
And he's incredibly distraught, and he goes on. Well, he goes on a killing spree.
Mm-hmm.
Not the same movie, but he has some really, really dark moments, and he does some very dark things. And then when I found out you were 19 when this was written,
You're like, oh, what?
yeah, what happened to this kid? Where did you draw your inspiration? I'm gonna guess that by 19, like, you hadn't been like cheated on, and like you hadn't been like driving over like buggies with babies and things.
No.
We're hoping, we're
No, not quite.
We'll cut that if you incriminate yourself.
No, yeah, right. Let's cut. It was just something, I don't know. I guess a few experiences that were bad, and I noticed that, you know, love affairs or stuff like that could really drive people over the edge when, you know, there was rejection involved. So I thought that would be a great spring point for, you know, instead of doing the Friday the 13th thing where there was teenagers, you had kind of people in their 20s or 30s that were dealing with this, and that kind of set them off. So it just kind of stuck with me, and I never have kind of deviated.
That is interesting, though, because at that point in time, you had all these older people who were drawing their inspiration from situations that teenagers would
Right.
be in. And you're a teenager, and you're like, I'm going to go look into the world of a 30-year-old.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Well, I had Joel and Al were both in their mid-20s, I think,
Yeah.
somewhere like that. So all my friends, even when I was like 16, 17, 18, were way older. So
Yeah.
I don't know if I was really any more mature, but
Yeah, but I mean,
I wouldn't
all of
say
those
that.
movies, though, do seem to depict the dead-end relationship, I guess, for lack of a better
Right.
term, like the destructive relationship really well. It's kind of
right.
unsettling. Now, with Truth or Dare, you upped the effects, obviously. You did some really good effects. Did you have other people who were pulled in that you have continued to work with, or you continue to work with after that? Because you do seem to have, like, any independent film director seems to have what I like to call the players.
Right.
Like, you know, like it's your effects guy that's always there, or your Joel babysitter.
You keep them as long as you can. None of them, I don't think that are still with me now, but because a lot of them went to Hollywood after they did. I think Steve Prouty did Zombieland, and he does all those big movies now. The effects team, they were already doing Ghostbusters and Code of Silence and all that stuff. So, you know, it was mainly me and Joel, and Al went on after, you know, we did that. So, but no, you know, you try to get a nice core group of people that you work with, and usually they stick together. Eric Stanzi had a group that he does, you know, John Waters in the early days. And it usually only lasts 5 or 10 years if you're lucky, because then people move on or they get bored or
Right, yeah.
or it's like
the troop breaks up.
You're right. But the first 2 movies, it was pretty much the same group, except for the makeup guys, because like I said, Steve Prouty did the Truth or Dare, and then also Bob Shelley, but he was already well established. And then, but with Killing Spree, we started out with Joel Harlow, who is now an Academy Award winning special effects makeup artist. It's Steven Spielberg, he's Johnny Depp's makeup guy. So he won an Academy Award for Star Trek a few years ago.
So this is a great segue. So Killing Spree, this was put out by Camp Motion Pictures, Michael Rasso, right?
Right.
Did he approach you about putting this out, or?
Actually, it goes through SRS Cinema,
Okay,
and he
which-
licensed it from them for his camp motion picture line.
Okay, and you, okay, if I'm misspeaking, I'll just edit this, but you had something to do with starting Sub Rosa, right? Or you were involved with
Well,
Ron
I
Bonk
was.
at that
I
point?
met Ron Bonk in like 1996, and he had Salt City Home Video, and I was already distributing. So naturally, we started talking to each other about. I was already distributing mainly my movies, and so he was just starting out with the company, his own company, and he was looking for product. And Killing Spree and Truth or Dare and a few of the other movies that I was doing helped his company get a good start along with his own material. He had, I think, City of the Vampires, and then he was just getting into that phase where he was acquiring other movies.
Right.
So I mean, I didn't help him start it, but I,
You were
worked,
just-
worked with him, and I was looking to get out of it because distribution is so in depth as far as time. You don't ever get time to make a movie, but he was able to balance that better than what I was doing. So
Yeah, so we were just talking about, eventually he made one of my favorite movies, She Kills.
right, yeah, which is a good one.
many years later, but I love that movie. Everybody knows that.
Yeah, and he's a great filmmaker. He was working with J.R. Bookwalter on Sandman, and I think a couple other movies like that.
I have a few of these from different filmmakers. I think I've got the Basement set from Michael Rassa, but it also
Oh,
has
cool.
like
Yeah,
Video
that's
Violence
good.
1 and 2. I
Right.
mean, it's kind of like the cool set, and it's got the VHS and everything in it. But so do you find that since your stuff has been coming out with this new wave of distribution, do you have like a renewed audience? Do you have a younger audience, or is it mostly people like me who are like, oh yeah, I saw that when I was like 12?
It's kind of a mixture. And of course, there's the retro people who are looking at it like, wow, this was great because my parents watched it. And also, there's new people finding it as well. So a little bit of mixture. And then some people don't get it at all. They're like,
Right.
I could do that with my phone. What's wrong
Right,
with me?
which I guess is the unfortunate thing, but hopefully people can see through that. You kind of were prolific there for a while, and then
Yeah, a lot of it, you get stuck distributing something, or because like the Killing Spree distribution took 3 or 4 years to do it myself and figure that out. So a lot of times you're working on stuff, or you're writing something and it's in development hell, or
Right.
whatever you want to call it, or you're trying to raise money or do all the above.
right, and you're just you,
right,
and
and you're trying to work a regular job on the side
Right,
to
and-
make ends meet. Somehow you're like, oh, there's no money coming in. I got to do something to.
Right, and that's the next thing I was going to ask, because this is always the conundrum of the independent filmmaker, even today, is real life steps in. So how were you able to, in the first, I'd say even like 10 years, how were you able to balance still being able to crank stuff out, be creative, and have a real life, a day job, so to speak?
No sleep. It was working a night shift job.
Being young.
And working, yeah, exactly. And working on that stuff, on this, because I had a job at a security where there was downtime, like in a booth a lot of times. So I could work on my scripts and study film and, improve myself, and then go into the day and actually do stuff, and then sleep 3 hours or 2 hours and go again, and it would just go on and on. So it definitely, a lot of coffee, lack of sleep. So, and it's insane. I still do that today somewhat, for this stuff that we're doing now, because if you have a 70-hour a week job where you're trying to make ends meet, and there's no health insurance in the movie business, for the most part,
Right.
unless you're in the unions, you have to have all that. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a bummer.
Yeah, it is. I've often said if we could figure out some way to do some kind of communal things where it's all of us take our skills and put them together,
Right,
to
they
have a
like a
company,
company, right, yeah.
right, and then
A unionized type
Right,
of
yeah,
thing that had insurance and all that.
Exactly. Hey, if anybody has any ideas,
That would be cool.
let us know. So once you transitioned into the 90s, you were getting a little bit older. To me, the 90s, like that late 80s to early 90s transition, and maybe I'm wrong, but it seemed like that was the drop off. Like the home video market was changing dramatically. You couldn't just put something out there
Right.
like you could in 85, 86.
Definitely not. It was more difficult.
So did you find that to be challenging, or were you already so well established at that point in time that you felt like you were kind of on the gravy train?
As a fan, I just I consider myself more a fan than anything. I know there's some movie makers you meet, you're kind of disappointed because they're just like, well, I'm either doing this just for the money or just for whatever, or it's a
Right.
job.
Never
I was
watched my own
hired.
movie.
Yeah, and I'm like going, I did it because I kind of had to contribute, because I was like,
Because you
it wasn't
wanted to.
enough to watch the movies, read about the movies, hear the commentaries when DVDs came out, watch the making of. I got to the point where my addiction is so great that I have to shoot my version of Last House on the Left or whatever it is,
Right.
or that little scene where I homage it, and that was kind of the rush. So that's where, I still do it now. So.
Right. And so 90s came around, and to me, I just always like, to me, it's like this unfortunate dark time in horror or whatever.
I remember for like 92 till 96
Yes.
was really bad until
Yeah.
Scream came out and kind of took slasher and horror back into vogue again.
So, did you leverage that? Or were you just like, I'm still here doing my stuff?
Yeah,
I'm doing,
when Scream came out, I was
and-
elated because I
Yeah.
love the movie, and I was shooting Screaming for Sanity at the
Yeah.
same time. So
You're
I mean,
like,
I had already been
works.
shooting, and I think we stopped shooting for a weekend so we could all go see Scream. So, and of course, Wes Craven is and was a great, inspiration. So
Yeah.
it was like, I was like, wow, I saw it over and over. So.
And there are differing opinions on that. I know there are a lot of people
Right.
who also
Some people don't like the balance
don't
of
like it.
humor, but I thought it was perfect.
I think it's great, and even if you hate it, if you're a horror fan, you have to at least appreciate that. Yes,
right,
it
'cause
brought
did,
horror back.
It did. It brought back some bad remakes and some recycled stuff,
Right,
but
a lot
also
of-
got everything back into
Right,
into
where we finally
marketable.
get to the 2000s.
Right.
So your, let's just say, more modern career, where would you say that started? Like, where would you say you stopped being Tim Ritter, legendary SOV director, and you started just being Tim Ritter, filmmaker? Or did you ever see it that way?
No, I just kind of just kept going. I think Deadly Dares, Truth or Dare Part 4 was, we had moved to Kentucky, and all my Florida connections, I was not using them as much, and we'd done a couple movies there, and then we had, like you said, a hiatus. And at that point, it was kind of starting again, and I was like, what if I remade Truth or Dare, or had that idea of just playing the game Truth or Dare? How would I do it with today's equipment, as if I was brand new? And that's how I approached, Deadly Dares, Truth or Dare Part 4, was like, if I just had that idea, the HD equipment, the more modern editing, what would it be? And that's kind of how
So
we
that is
approached.
kind of your turning
Right.
point,
So
right
again,
there. Yeah.
it was kind of, okay, let's go into this, new millennium and new age of equipment and keep going.
Right. And so how did you assemble your quote unquote crew here? Because
It
that's a pretty long distance, Florida to Kentucky. You
Right,
can really take
right.
people with you.
Well, a lot of people knew who I was that were doing, and everywhere you go, like, as you know, if you look hard enough, you can find people doing independent projects. Like here, there's Jacob Ennis, there's Claude Miles, he was doing stuff. Jerry Williams, he had made a salute to my movie Creep, and he was doing stuff. And I just kind of, networked out there on Facebook. And when you, of course, put your zip code in and everything
Right.
else, suddenly they're talking to you, you're talking to them, and again, everybody kind of comes
now
together.
you made
and,
friends.
right, so that's how we, did. Deadly Dares, and using Billy Blackwell and a couple other people that were involved in the local scene here, and just connecting with all these people
Right.
and saying, okay, we're doing this again. And they had, at that point, Netflix was running Truth or Dare and Killing Spree, so I, like you said, I had a little bit of a established
Right. You weren't just like the
reputation.
new kid in town.
Right,
You
I
were
was
the-
like, I've done this before. Let's try to
Right.
do this and see what happens.
So as far as this is just, well, I'm sure other people are interested in this too, but just as far as equipment goes, how did it evolve in that time, kind of that 90s to 2000s?
It got a lot smaller, as
Right.
we
I
say
mean,
that, but,
because obviously technology changed, and we
right.
know it from our perspective, but not necessarily from a filmmaking perspective. So.
Right, because you started with analog, which was like 300 or 400 lines of resolution, and now 4K, which is 4,000 lines of resolution. They got 6K, 10K, but I mean, the process of putting a project together is exactly the same as far as pulling the people, trying to pay everybody something decent, catering, finding locations, special makeup effects people, all the talent involved, music. I mean, that is exactly the same as it's always been, but I think you have a lot more leeway in the shooting, need less lights, they're not hot, editing, it's much more affordable to do because you have it at
Right.
your fingertips. So you save a lot of money in that. You can do it all yourself now. So it's definitely changed, and the quality, of course, is tremendous if you play with it and study it and do the best you can with it.
So I'm gonna steal from Joey from the Horror Mafia. He asked you this question of your stuff, like your older stuff, always tend to look better than your contemporary stuff. Looked more like a film, like a polished film. And maybe part of it too is this, I was listening to him talk about that. Part of it too might be the fact that you were using adults and not teenagers.
It could be. It could
yeah.
be.
But then as things get better and better and better, you do seem to still want to hold on to some of that, like, I won't say lower quality, but some of that like more like retro quality. So can you speak to like how you do that now when everything is so perfect? It's hard to make something look bad now. It really is hard to make something look bad.
Like Last House on the Left was documentary style, but some people may overuse that a little bit. But since Blair Witch, which is another movie that was a game changer,
Right.
maybe some people have gotten just kind of, I don't want to say lazy, but they like that style, and the longer takes with just the camera swishing around. Of course, TV shows like NYPD Blue kind of use that
Right.
style, and it's just like a longer take. I mean, I wouldn't say it's wrong, but I think it's just a stylistic choice, and the older stuff was more cinematic in that you would have your close-ups and your medium shots and everything set up and over the shoulder shots, whereas now you might just pan back and forth between, if it's us talking, and just go okay, let's
Right.
go, or one angle, where before you might do two shot individual shots and something else and cutaways. So a lot of it too is time.
Yeah.
There's no time to do this stuff, so people are just like, we got it, move on.
Right. Well, and you come from a place, obviously, where you were trying to make your stuff look better, and now people are kind of, I'm not saying this is for everybody who does like found footage or anything like that.
Right,
but
there's
some
different
people,
genres
there's
now.
definitely like people who are like, I have $0, I'm going to use this to my advantage, and then there are other people who hide behind that. Like, I'm a shitty filmmaker, so I'm just going to use a handy cam and I'm going to blame it all on the handy cam.
It just made me go like this.
Right, but it needs to be shaky. It's not all the.
And in some
copy.
cases it might, So
Right, yeah,
again, it's creative choice. So you
Right,
can't,
it's
I
half
can't
and half.
lambast all of them, but
So now now let's come up to what you've been doing. Now, we were talking earlier about the High 8
right.
trilogy. We did a little bit of snake bite
Right,
with Shannon. Poor Shannon. So what are you doing now? Like, I'm going to say now, like the last 10 years, where is your vision, and why do you keep doing this? Which I think I know the answer to that. Why do you keep doing this, and what keeps you fresh and moving forward?
I keep doing it because it's usually, as Trent Reznor said in one of his 9 Inch Nails songs, it's kind of the only time that I feel alive, like I'm really doing something, capturing these moments and keeping them in a way, and it just feels right. So that's just for me. And now I'm collaborating with Shannon on this stuff, so she's kind of reinvigorated my whole focus on making these movies, because it's very hard to get a special makeup effects artist and an actress that is reliable, that you can
Right.
afford, because usually they all move on or they lose interest or whatever.
Right.
So we've been kind of collaborating, and for the last year with Twisted Illusion stuff, and we hope to continue to do that and lead into bigger things.
So you've been doing the anthology thing more. Do you feel like that's kind of where things are, like the sweet spot, for lack of a better word, for you and your contemporaries? Because that's where it seems like I see you guys most of the
Right,
time.
on and off, yeah, because it's not as much as an investment financially and time-wise to get these things
Right.
going, and then we all work together to get these things out with Brad Sykes and all the people that co-produce these things and produce these things with Nightfall Pictures out in LA. So yeah, I mean it's good, and to make a feature, it's still, again, like we were talking about, it takes, from writing the script to finishing it can take 2 years before you even enter distribution, and then you might have another year of negotiating with distributors and waiting for the right time, and so it's like a 3-year investment. So these are a little quicker in that we're all doing them together, and then we don't have to worry about it as much.
Right.
And then when the deal's made, we all come out and help promote it.
You get to still be creative
Right.
without having to do all of the
Right.
bureaucratic crud that nobody wants to do.
And when you work tons of hours a week, it's just easier to have something small that you can wrap up and then move on, and not have to keep all these people together that maybe have other commitments, you know, and that kind of thing.
Now, where do you see yourself going? I feel like this is a job interview. Where do you see yourself going in the future? So, I mean, I'm assuming you're getting to an age where you're going to be starting to think about retirement. You're going to have more time on your hands. I mean, not like right now, but you know, I'm talking like longer term. Do you foresee kind of pulling out of it, or do you see maybe putting yourself more into it, going into a different role in the film industry?
Yeah, I don't know. I never really thought, you know, anything else other than doing this. So I never
what you do.
Never really had a plan. So I guess we'll just kind of keep going as we go and see what happens. But right now, I mean, as long as it's fun and everybody's, you know, happy and enjoying what they're doing, and you have good collaborators and people who love to do it as well, that kind of fuels you to keep doing it. And people like yourself who participate and enjoy it and jump in on the action. I mean, what more is there? It's not really for money. It's not really for any kind of fame or anything like that. It's for just the love of doing it and contributing to the, you know, horror genre, really.
So in your opinion right now, who is like your filmmaker to watch? Who do you think is out there making things that you're interested in? And it could even be somebody who's established.
You mean like in the independent scene, or just
in the indie scene, probably?
You know, unfortunately, the people who I really grew up with, the business has changed so much with streaming and the way people view. I mean, we have all these great, like we were talking about, 4K TVs and 10K.
Oh, right.
But everybody's watching everything on a small handheld. They're binge watching television shows on a 3-inch screen, and you're like going. So there's not as many John Carpenter's, Wes Craven's, George Romero's, David Cronenberg's as there were, you know, when I grew up. And really, those were the guys, you know, with like Alfred Hitchcock and H.G. Lewis and John Waters, who really grabbed me and said, hey, this is, you know, now, I mean, Rob Zombie, he's a good example.
Yeah, so say where they're just being kind of buried.
Right,
because
and
there's so
Eli
many.
Roth, but, you know, in the industry that, you know, the independent scene, there's all kinds of really cool people like Ron Bonk and, you know, other people that are jumping in and doing this stuff. Brad Twigg. You know, there's a lot of people doing things, but it's kind of different.
Yeah.
You know, the inspiration, because we're all on and even John Carpenter said, I have problems raising money. They don't want to give me any money, and, you know, I can't do that anymore. But I'm one who's like going, well, I'm just going to try to do something. You know?
Right, and John Carpenter's probably looking for a little bit of extra.
Well,
and
every time they make a Halloween, you know, he gets a nice check, and he's got the backup soundtrack gig going and everything, which is awesome. So
Okay, so here's my final question. So to a person right now who's watching this, who maybe is just interested in getting into independent film, who maybe just has an idea, a dream, doesn't have a lot of contacts, whatever, where do you think that they should start, and what advice do you have to them? You already said your advice was, if you want to make a movie, just make a movie.
Right.
But what more tangible advice would you give to those people?
Well, you have to see what your strong points are and connect with someone on social media, probably, if you don't have you know, film school is one route. A lot of people go to film school and they network to make connections. And, you know, I know in the 70s, that's how, you know, George Lucas and all those guys, you know, got their start. So, I mean, to a degree, you can probably do that. Or you get on social media and you meet people in your area. You start a little group of, you know, people with like-minded interests. You find somebody who's suitably strong in producing and suitably strong in, you know, all the areas that you may need depending on what your project is, whether it's special effects, virtual effects, you know, that sort of thing. And again, you just apply I'm going to do this no matter, you know, what format I have or what equipment or what budget. I'm going to either do it big, I'm going to do it small, but I'm just going to do it. And that's how I approach any project still. It's just like, sometimes you get out of bed and you're like, oh man, how am I going to even do? But then you just do it, you know. So
you do it because you love it.
And you got to find a couple people to support you and that co-collaborate really well.
So as far as equipment goes, what would you recommend for somebody who's just starting out? I mean, or are you one of those people who is just like, if you have a phone, you have a phone.
Right.
If you've got a really nice
Well, I've always said use what you have access to, but at the same time you want to study the market a little bit and see what's commercial. And HD cameras, or, you know, decent ones, are anywhere from $300 and up. So
Yeah.
and you can go with 4K.
Sky's
and
the limit.
it's
Yeah.
like just go on Amazon, read the reviews. I do that for lighting, equipment. You can get everything you need on Amazon. Amazon.com.
Right.
Was my
Facebook
endorsement?
and Amazon.
Exactly.
There were our two product sponsors. Yeah, right. One thing that's become a game changer, for better or for worse, is crowdfunding. What's your opinion on using crowdfunding? Have you ever tried to use it? Are you open to using it, or is that something that you want to steer clear of?
And crowdfunding, I mean, we did a little bit of it on Truth or Dare 5 with Scott Tepperman, and it worked out okay, but we didn't get enough, and then Scott had to go find some outside investors as well. And, you know, of course, it's got pros and cons, and you have to become a business person even more so because you have obligations to send out posters and discs, and a lot of people don't realize that where you put your crowdfunding on, they take a portion, and then you got to manufacture this stuff. That's another. So if you get $10,000, you may only have 6 or 7 to spend on your movie after all these other mailing expenses.
Right, I was going to say, then shipping.
It's like outrageous. So I mean, yeah, if you can use it realistically and you can deliver on what you say, I would say start small, try it, and see what happens. I mean, I'm not against any way to raise money, but I try to steer kind of clear of it myself because I would just rather, you know, do it the old school way and either have it paid for or get investors, you know.
Right. Well, and that's the thing too. You obviously have some people that you can go ask for, you know, a little bit of cash. Or,
yeah, if I wanted to do
yeah.
something bigger, you know, you can try for like $10,000. But I mean, I know like House Shark did it really well, and I know there's been a lot of successes with it, you know, and even the big guys, Dario Argento and you know, Rob Zombie did one for 31. So you know, whatever works.
Whatever
you know.
works. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. And I appreciate everything that you've done. I think I said this in our last interview, but you've obviously provided tons of entertainment for a lot of us, and also some inspiration.
Very cool.
I will say that I don't practice what I preach, but it does inspire me to do more and not use excuses.
And you might decide you want to do a feature. All this stuff is fuel for, you know, whoever wants to go out and if you have an idea, you're like, you know, this would be great, and we're going to give it a shot.
Yeah,
you know,
that one's trying to. All right, thanks, guys. I think we're going to do another interview, and we're going to do some other stuff.
Other stuff.
So what do your neighbors think about all of this when you guys do
The
this
only
stuff?
ones that really know are the young couple next door. They're a little bit younger than us, and they know about it.
How long have you lived here?
12, 13 years.
So I'm going to guess some things have happened in and outside of this yard.
We've done some stuff back here. And, some, you know, they hear screams coming from the house. Luckily, the lady next door is she has a little bit of Alzheimer's, so she doesn't understand what's going on.
So she's not going to really care about this
she probably
showing
just
up
thinks
in
we're
her
watching,
neighborhood.
you know, horror movies or watching sports because, you know.
Well, I was going to say, well, right now, you know, she could just say it's Halloween.
It's
Look
my
at her,
pussy
she's pussy.
venom.
So here we'll get in. So she had to go put some pus because she just got totally bit.
Yeah, she got bit. So, why are you two here?
Because we're trying to help you battle the aliens. Duh.
This is what you need. Alien blood?
Yes. It'll work. All you have to do is drink it. But read the instructions because I think you're supposed to put it in the microwave too. It's better warm. Take part.